Okay guys, I just wanted to show you why I'm after, or what codes we're after, what codes we had in this vehicle. Keeps coming back to the camshaft position timing is over retarded. We might have an open coolant switch too, which might explain some of the way it runs, but cylinder 4 misfire. I believe that was from pulling the coil. And it's camshaft current and camshaft history. So we have camshaft over retarded pending, current, and history. That's why we're out to try to confirm the timing. But this, I know it had a new chain put on it, it had a new phaser put on it, had a new oil control solenoid put on it. So it's, you know, I could just go right to that, check the chain, but this, being this is an actual use of the transducer, pretending I knew nothing about the car, I never seen it before in my whole life. This is going to be, you know, where a transducer is going to, you know, be part of your diagnostic arsenal that you need to get in there, and you need to confirm the timing before you disassemble an engine, which, I mean, could be a V6, a V8. I mean, something a lot harder to get to than this timing chain. So I'm going to get to it. First, I'm going to do a manual compression test. I pulled the fuel pump relay. She shouldn't start. And I just have, going into number 1, I have an old manual compression gauge. I'm going to put the camera on it so you guys could see it when I crank it. We're going to see what we get. All right, guys. All right, I have it set up so that the ignition is still firing because I have the fuel disabled. I believe on Toyotas, on some models, the computer will shut down the coils if the fuel pump's not working, but at Toyota, I believe the coils still fire. I'm not sure. If you want to find out, you guys are going to be the only ones that could actually see this. From inside the car, I'm not going to be able to see the spark in the spark tester, but we're going to crank it. I'm going to hold my foot to the floor on the accelerator and just crank it, and we're going to just get a cranking compression test. That should have been enough. I usually crank them until they get to their maximum compression. 150, 160, 170, 175 on the money. So we have 175 pounds of pressure. We'll get the phone a little bit closer so you guys can see. That's pretty decent compression. Now that's what we're going to try to confirm. This is a tried and true method that we all learned on, and using the transducer, that's something that, you know, learning as we go, and it's the unknown that you don't trust. We want to get as good with these things that we can trust it, just like we trust that. But all right, guys, so let me get the transducer set up and we'll see what it does. Okay guys, going with the same setup. I mean, we got the pressure transducer in there. I have it turned on and I have it plugged in to channel 1 of the 512. Now, between the 502 and the 512, I mean, the 502 gets, we're only looking for 1 volt equals 100 PSI. So we're only going to be looking for somewhere around, all we need is like a 2 volt scale, which the HS512 does not have. But we're not too far off. We have a 3.3. We're not on its lowest. So I believe this is going to be fine for this test, because you always want to stay, you know, if you're anywhere near the middle or you know, around it of where your scope's made to run, then you're going to get a pretty accurate measurement. If we had to stay on the 1 volt scale, then maybe, you know, the 502 would have been a little bit better, but I think they're both going to perform. You know, the 502, it would have probably been on a 4 volt scale here or 2 volt scale here. Either way, no, it would be half of this, so it would be a 1.5, so it would be in the middle. That's probably running a little bit better, but this should be more than enough. I'm going to go to the automotive module. We're going to keep the amplitude on 3.3. I'm not going to use a filter. I want to put as much time on the screen as I can. I'm going to go with 1 second. All right, I'm going to start it. Pretty close to 0, but I'm still going to hit the 0 button on the transducer. It did its thing. Now I'm going to start, and I'm going to do the same test. Pedal to the floor and crank it. All right, we're going to stop that. Go back and see what we got. Okay, there we go. You could see the exhaust valve. This would be our vacuum here. We're building back pressure. You see more detail than I thought. Sometimes on a cranking compression, you don't see detail on the exhaust valve. This is where the intake valve would be open, and then we're going back up to fire again. But I'd say that's pretty nice. The only thing that strikes me as odd is we have seen with the manual gauge, we had 175 pound of pressure. With the transducer, most I'm getting here is 145, and that was on initial cranking. So is the transducer, I mean, that's 30 pounds. That's enough to call an engine or not. I mean, the peak air 140, I mean, that's at the bottom end of Toyota specs, I believe. I'm not sure. Compression pressure, 145 is its minimum. On the higher end, the 189, we're at 175 pounds with the manual gauge. So we're running close to the bottom end of compression, which, you know, the gauges, people, it's a power built gauge. I mean, it's not a snap-on, it's not a Mac, but it's a pretty accurate gauge. But what do you trust, the gauge or the transducer? But there's many more things you could do with the transducer that, you know, I think anything with the scope like that, I'd be putting a manual gauge in anyways. Just like if it tells you, like if light tells you low oil pressure, you put a manual gauge in it. Trust the manual. But it seems to me with 160,000 miles on it, you know, the 140 is probably more accurate than 175, but who knows? Toyota engineering. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a sync into the #1 coil. We're going to see where the spark is occurring, and then we're going to do it with the engine running so we know where we're getting, and give it a little couple snap throttles, see what kind of information we can get out of that. All right, let me get that set up on channel 2. All right, just an in-between the scenes preview. I don't believe I'm going to be using it on this Toyota, but from Rotkey.com, I finally gotten, well, everything you expect is going to take a while from overseas, especially what's going on in the Ukraine, and they still managed to get products out. Took about 2 weeks to get it, but there's a Dennis on the Gadgets playlist. He has a way to make your own pulse sensor if you're, but even he said on one video, I mean, for the prices, I believe this is either $12 or $14. It already has the BNC. But if you do want to play around and make your own, I mean, there's plenty of videos out there how to make them. I figure I didn't need it right at the time, so I'm trying to do is build up an arsenal of everything that you can basically use with a picoscope, and, you know, see how HScope runs it. So far, I'm, you know, very impressed. See how the compression goes on this one. I do have another manual gauge. I'm going to double check it again, you know, before I start taking this engine apart. I just want to see why. I don't hear no puffing. I don't hear no like air escaping when I crank. You know, usually if you get a little leak when you're doing the compression test, you hear it. I mean, it makes itself known. But we'll see. But that's just a little preview. All right, guys. I'll be back hooked up to the car, and we're going to do the running compression test. Before we get started taking measurements, you always want to calibrate your equipment. I mean, we want precise measurements, so we want to make sure everything is precise. Just go to calibration. I go to 0, and all you do is put your two leads together. Hit continue. All right, we're calibrated. It's that easy, and it's definitely worth doing. All right, now I'm going to hook that up to the coil, and we'll see where the sparks occur. Okay, on the car I have the transducer on, and I have the coil back probe, the control wire. And it's pretty easy to find without a diagram on these. You have 3 wires that are the same color on every coil, and the second one in is a different color. We're out after the different color wire. I have that hooked to there. I have the negative going to battery negative. I had a regular lead on here, but there's no real room to move this connector, and it was kind of laying over the other coil. You want to try to keep it as far away from interference as you can, and just a bent probe seemed to be the best I could do. Okay, I'm going to set up the software. On channel 1, we're still running the amplitude. We want to go down to 3-volt scale. Actually, I'm going to want to put an attenuator going into the coil. I'm going to go with a ×10. Keep it on 32 for now, because we're just looking for a mark. But all right, let me put the attenuator on, then I'll put the camera back on a tripod, and we could see what it looks like running. Okay guys, I'm going to try running it with the sync and see what we get. Okay, we're way overskilled on the voltage. I'm going to give it a couple snaps. I haven't even actually lost part of it. I'm going to give it a couple snap throttles and we'll see what that looks like. Okay. Now we'll stop. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant to hit save. Okay, there, we saved that data. Now this will be on the snap throttle that we're seeing all this. Not a lot of noise, probably underscaled the ignition, but This is what we want to take a look at. There's where the spark would be occurring. So, oh, actually, I'm going to put on the phase rulers, and I just actually learned from a comment that how to switch them to 720. Click on them and you click the gear and see it turns to 720 degrees. That would be 2 rotations of the crankshaft and 1 of the cam. So we want to move the 0 to 1 peak. Then you want to move the 720 to another peak. Let's look, as long as it's 360 in the middle, you're a whole 720 apart. And you could either take it this way. I'm sure you could change the math to tell you how many degrees before, but if you just move to this edge, like 31 degrees. I believe 18's the max. So the spark would be occurring advanced. If it's occurring 31 degrees and 18 is the 10 to 18 is the specs. So this number's higher. Compared to the compression, the spark itself, I guess, would be advanced, but in relation to your camshafts, it's retarded. That's why it's called the cam retarded code. It's 31 degrees, so yeah, that's a good bit. I don't know, you could break down, you could count, I mean, the teeth on the sprocket for a timing chain, you could figure out how much one tooth is, but something like that would be reason to go. The only question I do have is the actual compression didn't seem to be accurate. Or it was accurate and the manual gauge was inaccurate. So it would say about 102 pounds there running, 115 pounds running. Well, this must have been coming back down from a snap. Yeah, we could see we change. And there's a lot more to the in-cylinder analysis, like this on a D cell. And I'm sure there's measurements for it. I mean, it depends how deep you want to dive into this. But it's easy enough to do measurements. And something I would research before, being both edges would make this justify, you know, tearing the engine front apart to seeing what the problem is with the manual timing marks. But I believe the spark would occur at the falling edge, or it's the whole duration, but I believe it would be going from the falling edge. I'd have to look into if it's the rising or the falling edge where this thing's actually picking up the signal to fire. I believe the coil would fire after on the falling edge, but either way it would be too far advanced. But it's pretty neat to be able to, you know, actually prove something. Because like I said, this is a pretty easy one to get to get to the actual marks. But if this was a V6 or something, and it was very hard to get to, this might be, you know, save you a lot of time, save you a lot of aggravation over something that, you know, there might not be nothing wrong with. But all right, on a closing note, what I'm going to do is I have another compression gauge I'm going to put on, and we're going to just take a regular compression again. Just with a regular compression gauge, see what, you know, it's kind of, there's going to be two of one thing, or one's going to point to something not being accurate. Could be my error, but for now it's all right. That's all I just wanted to do, to see if I could actually prove something was out of time. But that, like I said, I did not disconnect them too. There's two connectors that you're supposed to, let me see if I still have the service info here. All right, guys, no, that's not it. I'm going to see if we pick up it. There we go. The TC and the CG terminal of the DLC3. You're supposed to disconnect them. So before you'd use this for any definitive information, I mean, you would have to find out where these are. On the old Russian Mitchell, I looked under every connector. It's probably something simple. It says it's under the trim panel. There's about 8 connectors there. Yeah, I'm sure none of them are labeled, but I didn't want to get that far into it. If I was going to make a call just based on that waveform, I definitely want to look into this and take them off. It's almost like on the old style, before you check the vacuum, or before you check the timing, you disconnect the vacuum advance. So we might add a little bit of different numbers, but that was my plan, to see if I could catch it, just see if I could set it up and see if I could actually run a test like that. And it did pretty good. All right, guys, I'm going to put in the manual gauge again. We're going to see, you know, for sure what both of these mean. I'll be back. All right, guys, I got another compression gauge in there. One thing that's bad is we were running it, we were fooling the ignition, but we weren't fooling the fuel injectors. The injectors were still dumping into that cylinder. So just like on a compression test where you're looking, you know, if it's rings or valves and you add a little bit of oil to the inside the combustion chamber, that's kind of like what flooding it with fuel does, because this cylinder hasn't fired. What you should probably do, if you're looking for accuracy, put that coil back in there, burn off all that fuel, and then do it again, just like we did with the original compression gauge. But this is manual gauge number 2. I'm going to get in, crank it, and we're going to see how much pressure it generates. Yeah, we're about 185 and going for 190. But that's closer to 175 and being flooded with fuel. And this is a very cheap gauge too. That's just an auto parts store gauge. But it's always good to have a backup to check your other equipment. But right now it seems like the 2 manual gauges were better at picking up the compression than the transducer was, and they seem to be closer in the agreement. So if anybody knows anything I was doing wrong setting up the transducer, it's pretty straightforward. 1 volt equals 100 psi. As long as you're zeroed out, you should have been able to measure that peak. The scope is more accurate taking measurements, but is the transducer as accurate as a manual gauge? I don't know. But if the transducer told me I had a compression problem, I'd definitely check it with a manual gauge afterwards. You should anyways. Just part of good habits. Like now that I'm done, when I take this compression gauge out, I'm going to put a Borescope down and just take a look at the valve, see what kind of condition they're in. I mean, this is a very unmaintained vehicle. You know, run low on oil a lot, run empty on oil actually a lot. But we're going to see what it looks like inside of there. You got the plug out, you got the shot, you may as well take it. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Adios. All right, guys, there's what it's showing the inside. That's the piston. I mean, why the hot spots and why it looks like rust, I have no idea. It's hard to tell if that's green or if that's the light. It's, you know, that's usually cause of cheap gas. Now what we could do is put it the whole way down, then turn it up and have a little look-see at the valves. Here's a couple of them. One. They're all still there technically. I mean, that's a lot of buildup on these things. But hey, it's a Toyota. Oh, the greenness got me more concerned because I did do just a regular with radiator test kit to see if it held pressure, and I also used the liquid that you put into the test tube and you hold over the radiator cap while it's running. Well, you got to have the thermostat open, and it, surprisingly, you're supposed to squeeze that bulb for like 30 seconds. I squeezed it for 3 minutes just to make sure this thing didn't have a bad head gasket. But then by the looks in there, just dirty fuel. Either if you use dirty fuel, you have to use like put Lucas in at every oil change. Keep the injectors happy, keep all that crap out of your engine. But anyways, maybe that's why, you know, with the two valves we were getting a different look on there. But all right, guys, that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed it. Adios. So to show you, I'm not too concerned about that green in there. Seems like as this, you move this around towards light, a lot of things do look green that aren't. Whenever I seen that color, I thought I was looking at antifreeze, but I just figured I'd put that in there, just put that to rest so everybody don't think they saw a puddle of antifreeze in there. All we saw was a filthy piston and filthy valves. Okay guys, I took the valve cover off and I lined up the timing mark. We're at 0 down on the bottom. I got a little bit of yellow paint on it. It's lined up on the 0 mark, and what I did, I know this isn't the most accurate of methods, but I took this degree wheel and I lined it up, splitting the bolt in the middle, and then looking until the hose is a little bit in the way. But lining up the degree wheel. And then what I did is I downloaded, this is on Factory Service Manual or Google. I've seen it on Mitchell, the same diagram. Okay, holding it by my eye. I mean, we're trying to get the center line aligned. It's very close. I mean, it's not within a link. And then I did the other side. Well, let me pause the video and I'll take the measurement of the other side with this and then just come back and compare it. Okay guys, and this is the exhaust cam. if I move that to the line, we can see we have the same angle. I just wanted to leave it so you could see that angle. Now I'm covering up that line, and we'll straighten this and splitting that chain link. So I know the two in the middle, they're meeting. The tensioner, it's a little bit loose. I mean, it's brand new also, but it seems to me, I can't get you a good view down there, the ease that this thing goes back in. For a brand new tensioner, I mean, you'd think there'd be a little bit more tension behind it. But I mean, this engine, I mean, he has overheated it. He's right, well, not, I don't believe, oh yeah, he has overheated it, but he's also, you know, not known to change the oil and not known to check the oil. But, you know, it's a little bit, you know, starting to suspect something with the oil, because the solenoid and this phaser, it's a variable timing VVT solenoid. Well, this is actually the solenoid down here, and this is actually, I guess you'd call it the actuator. I mean, Ford's call it a phaser. I mean, all it does is it moves your timing. But I'm wondering if it's not working just because this thing had a lot of oiling problems or a lot of issues. So I'm going to see if he wants to throw a pump in it, because if I have to take his chain off again, I mean, that's not enough evidence. It seemed like the scope was giving us more evidence of the timing being off, but you know, this is the way I've been doing it for over 30 years, and I mean, if I checked that timing, I'd say this one was good. It, you know, it does run on oil pressure. There is a way I'm going to look up too. I've seen a way that somebody, you could take it up, take the cap off, and you could blow air into the valve, and you could manually watch the phaser unlock, because this was locked. That's the way it's supposed to be for insulation, but does it ever unlock? Does the RPMs increase? Does this thing give it the right amount of oil? But I don't think it's a chain issue. I mean, the cam sensor itself, that's where it's getting a lot of its information. It's pretty old and beat, but you know, this is all it has to pick up, this square edge. I mean, she's filthy. All right, guys, thanks for sticking with me, and we're gonna see this one through. We're gonna see what the cause is. If it takes a pump, I'm gonna put a pump in it. I'll take the chain off again. But you know, these vehicles are pretty tough. You can put them through a beating like that. If this was an American car, I mean, I'd really be doubting myself. But if we're getting that kind of compression out of this, doesn't have a blown head gasket, should be able to put some clean oil in it, maybe flush it out a couple times, blow some air through the oil passages, see if we could get that actuator to actually start moving this valve. And if it does, you know, put it back together and see what we got. But to me, that timing don't look off. What do you guys think? Here's a good view of the back. I'm not sure if you could see the timing mark on. You could see the top of the keyway, and you could see the timing mark would be right there. I mean, you see one more moving at one link would make it more off time than on time. But we'll see. It's an ongoing story. All right, guys. Adios. All right, guys. It's time I pause for some reflection. And after watching some of the data I had, I noticed on the one video I highlighted these more in yellow just to make them easier to see on the bottom. It appeared I was on a D-cell whenever I was checking the timing, or measuring the timing and measuring the compression. But also, the biggest thing, I mean, the timing, the biggest lesson I think I learned here is I was wondering why they look like a square wave at first, but I'm on the signal wire.
I'd want to be on, in this case, a negative lead to get the primary ignition, like the wave, because this is the signal. I'm sure there's somewhat of a delay, because I mean, with the falling edge, I was assuming this was the coil actually firing. But you know, whenever you have several options, you pick one, and it's not always the right one. But that's nice that you could go back and you could look, see where discrepancies were, and see if you recorded anything worth, I mean, that could actually, you know, solve your problem, or, you know, advance your knowledge of what you're looking at. But I'm on the signal wire. That's the green trace. I would have wanted to be on the actually taking, because there would have been no reason to attenuate the signal wire. I was going like I was checking the primary ignition pattern, which I wasn't. I was on the signal. So that would make the timing gain accurate. But one thing I did notice, like I said, I was on the D cell. It appeared down here in the bottom. You could see where I snapped the throttle. And sometimes I just let this scroll through and I lose where I'm at. But on the D cell, you naturally, your engine's not breathing as much. It's, you know, coming back to, it's actually forming vacuum, high vacuum. But that wouldn't be that good of a measurement. So I went over to where it was just idling. And then whenever I look at the compression here, yeah, it'll be 187 from ground zero. So that's what we're looking at. This valves, I mean, there's two exhaust valves, two intake valves. I believe that maybe what this hump was I saw. And then maybe this, when there's two valves, maybe one, you know, cam lobe could be worn out for all I know. This is the only cylinder I checked. But I want to get to the bottom of the timing mystery, or why this thing keeps thinking it's out of time whenever I check them marks the best I can. But just sitting there, I figured out that, you know, both gauges and the HScope are within, you know, 15 pounds of each other. And it's you'd want a more precise measurement. You'd want to, you know, or learn which one you could trust the best. But I mean, it's a good, it'll tell you if a motor got compression, but you could see on this, it's almost like a square wave. We're just, that's the signal. And we're topping out on it. You know, on channel 2, that's not even going 5 volt on it. All right, guys, but I mean, you learn something every time. I think this is a great platform to record what you do, and you know, hopefully get some input. And I know a lot of you guys have showed me a lot. A lot of you guys showed me a lot through your videos, and I appreciate it. All right, guys, adios.
Hey guys, one final note. This pressure transducer that I'm using, it's about a $300 transducer. The Picos are much more expensive. There's people out there using this one. DJ Mobile, he's the first guy I've seen running this on HScope, and he has a lot of great videos using this transducer. Dennis on the Gadgets playlist, he has, I believe he reviews the Rotkey, and he also shows you how to make one out of very inexpensive Ravi fix. There's a lot of guys out there that if you want and they get beautiful patterns. I mean, they're getting patterns just as good as this, and they're making it. I was going to do it, but I had too many cars to work on at the time, so I just ordered it and took the easy way out. But yeah, there's a lot of ways you can make this. I mean, fairly cheap. You know, it would surprise you if you're a little bit handy in the solder, and you don't have to pay for anybody's pressure transducer. And you could use a lot of your fittings from compression gauges, whatever you got old, you know, that you're not using. Sometimes you get a better compression gauge, or you get a better, you know, anything that those same, seems like, you know, it's like a non-American fitting that, you know, don't work with our airlines too well. But now DJ Mobile, he's had his switched over to like a more standard airline. And Dennis on Gadget's playlist, he has a reason why you wouldn't want to remove the Schrader valve from them. So, I mean, both good points. I mean, both good things you could do with these things. But, you know, hey, you got to experiment. All right, guys. Thanks a lot. Adios. All right, guys. Just in case you're following along, I took out the VVT solenoid that goes up in there. Let's have a better look at it in the oil passages. I seen a video that there was a screen underneath it. I wasn't even aware that there was a screen for this. And I've worked on a lot of Toyotas, but I've never seen one that, you know, was that big of an issue. And I mean, you can't even see through it holding up to the light. So, and if you can't even see through it, I can't see how it's running its variable valve timing with, I mean, there's a lot of sludge in this engine. I mean, just burn oil. And that thing, I mean, it's seen better days, my friends.